Welcome everybody to the KScope 13 conference and the current focal point of the database world. This is the place to be right now. Wanted to welcome you to the Database and Tools Q&A panel. We've got a panel of superstars here, and I just wanted to introduce them. First, on the far side, we have Kellyn Potvin, works for Encatech as a senior technical database administrator, senior technical staff. Consultant, thank you. Two gentlemen, probably don't need to be introduced, but I will anyway. Stephen Feuerstein, PL SQL, I'm not sure what the right term is to use, but PL SQL guru.
Fanatic? No, my official title is evangelist.
Evangelist. Cary Millsap, Method R, legend. And myself, Tim Gorman, consultant, worked for ODTUG and other user groups. So we have a Twitter feed running at hashtag KScope13 DP for database panel. And we've got a variety of things to discuss, anything that you want to ask. One thing I might throw out there for those of you who aren't aware at the moment, but Database 12c just went up on edelivery.oracle.com. Don't know if it means to stay up, and I think available is probably going to be a relative word since everybody in the world is going to be hitting it.
And how big is the download?
I was looking at, it looks like the usual, in terms of how big the download is, it looks like the usual 5 or 6 file download, the first which, top of the screen that I saw was 1.3 gigs, so the usual multi-gig download in zip files. So, so we're open for questions, thoughts, things at the top of your mind. In the PL SQL world, what do we have new and exciting?
They have to start, don't they? They ask us questions and we
throw
answer
something out.
Oh, we can talk about 12c new features, right?
Yes, the young lady in the center of the room here.
So with 12c coming out this week, were any of you involved in the beta? And can you tell us anything that you liked about the new software? Any features, functionality that was interesting?
I was in the beta program and I'm super, super excited about it. Going public because now I can write quizzes with some new material. So I write 5 new PL SQL quizzes each week with verification code, and it's supposed to be interesting. And I got to tell you, it's been 3 years now.
Or lean
I have
forward.
to speak up. Anyway, so I'm really excited to have these features out. Not that anybody is clearly going to be doing much with them for a while. Most developers won't really be caring about 12c in any deep day-to-day way for probably many months to come. But the PL SQL side of things, not anything super major. For example, in 11G, again, it was a release in which PL SQL was not a major focus, but we had the function result cache, which is an amazing feature with a lot of potential. And in 12c, there were a variety of useful, relatively small tweaks to the language. That's good, but hopefully in 13 we'll get even more. Anybody else?
I could mention that, if nothing else, the publishing world is gearing up. I know that there have been book projects sitting on hold waiting for 12c to become available. And this is it, as of a few hours ago. I think folks will actually have software that won't be under NDA that they can finally start to explore and publish about. So, yes?
So I know with every new version you get things that you've long been waiting for. And I know one of the things in 12c I was least excited about was now you don't have to play games with triggers on sequences. According to Tom Kite, the Oracle now has magic to automatically associate a column to a sequence and generate the primary key. And I want to know what features are you guys waiting for that either are or are not in 12c or future versions? What would you like? Thank you.
You first. My turn.
I'd like for container databases not to be an extra cost item.
As a shareholder of Oracle, I like that.
I'm not so much concerned about the licensing issue with the pluggable databases, but the actual feature itself, I think, holds a lot. As a DBA that works on Exadata and the idea of being able to do consolidations with pluggable databases, I think it's a feature that a lot of people will put to use once 12c comes out in Exadata. And it won't be soon.
Well,
I can probably speak loud enough for everyone. But since 12C is no longer like private, can we see the session information? It'll post now?
Oh,
That was a yes.
okay.
I'm presuming my session information will be yes. And I spoke to Tom and he said his would be too.
Yeah, that's all information that we just lost. I'm sorry, what was the question again? So,
Seriously, you couldn't hear me?
I couldn't. I was too busy trying to reach you.
Will the 12C information be available now, posted? Because we couldn't take pictures.
Documentation?
They couldn't share the presentation.
No, the sessions during the show.
Yeah.
Sessions.
Sessions that have happened so far that cover 12C, there were no slides uploaded for those.
Okay, sessions that have happened so far that covered 12C, no slides posted up until now?
Whenever I get back to my room and I post them.
Oh, right. What's that?
I guess mine will go up as well.
Okay, yeah, the flood has begun. Content is being posted as we speak.
Has it been announced yet, or is it just available
I
for
don't
download?
think so. It's just there.
It's just there. I mean, the cat's out of the bag.
Yeah.
There's actually, it was announced a couple hours ago on Twitter. I was actually one of the beta testers, thanks to Ms. Kellyn up there. And so I've been keeping a real tight hold on over at Bias and everything else about who can publish what and do what with the software. And one of the guys that I'm friends with on Twitter, he posted that it was available for download earlier this morning, and I was like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? And I just saw a tweet from him that he's blogging about the install process now. So I think the cat's out of the bag, like Tim is saying. So,
But until Ellison tweets about it, it's not real.
well, that's true, but so and over at my company, they're asking me now about can we blog about this? I'm going, well, there's not an official date yet, so there's still some anticipation about what's actually happening. So I don't know how Oracle's going to control the flood of blog posts going out, because without being out on e-delivery, it's going to be hard to control who's going to do what. So I don't know.
Wouldn't it be interesting if it was just somebody who made a decision that it was going to go up and this isn't really official at all?
Somebody checked a box in an Apex screen
And right
Yeah.
now,
by
this-
accident.
And right now, this person is sitting in a palace in Beijing petting a phoenix.
Saying we have a rebel without a cause?
That's another lead.
Seemed like a fine cause.
Oh, gosh. Any other 12C features that we're anticipating with bated breath?
So one of the features for PL SQL developers and SQL as well is the with clause being extended to support function definitions. So probably a lot of you are familiar with, I think it's called subquery factoring. You can have a with statement with basically moving selects in there and give them names and then use them in your from clauses and so forth. So now, but if you needed to do some processing, let's say some complex substring manipulation, and more than that, you did it more than once in your SQL statement, you could write a function in PL SQL and then call that function in multiple places to avoid the redundancy in your code, or you could leave it in place, multiple places. The downside of calling the PL SQL function is that there's a context switch that slows things down. So with 12c, you can now define a function, literally define a function inside the with section, and then you can call that function inside your SQL statement, and it doesn't do a context switch. So that sounds pretty good, and I'm pretty sure Tom talked about this on Sunday. I wasn't there, and showed how it was so much faster. So that sounds really good. The downside is that it's probably going to be useful in a fairly limited set of circumstances for not trivial algorithms and formulas, but fairly straightforward stuff. Because if you need to do anything really complex that involves, for example, calling another PL SQL program unit inside your with function, that's going to do the context switch out to PL SQL. So it looks like a nice tool. As with many things that Oracle provides, some of them have a massive impact on our lives as developers and the users. Some, it's more narrow, and I think this will be useful, but fairly narrow in its scope.
I think a feature that's going to have a bigger impact than people think is the, and Tom, you may need to wave your hands in sign language, but I think it's the JDBC side, the array fetch size automatic adjust on the client side.
Sorry, once again.
It's an OCI thing where anything that's using OCI.
Oh, good.
The statement cache is set, the fetch size is set. All those tunable parameters that no developer ever tunes.
Right.
We'll be watching your application and then setting them for that.
Yeah. I like that. It's just another example of the database trying to keep ahead, kind of lay tracks in front of the train as the train's rolling to keep developers from making mistakes of not knowing enough about this huge black box called Oracle.
Any other JDBC issues? No? Yeah. Go for it, man.
Pluggable databases, can you kind of talk about what does that mean for us? I mean, heard about it, but, you know, what does it mean?
A lot of people who are from the SQL Server world understand this completely. When you're sitting in a SQL Server environment, you're going to look at a system database, and then you're going to have your user databases underneath. The idea that Oracle is going to I'm just going to say a similar design, but it is completely revamped so that it supports Oracle's idea of going to a consolidated environment so that you have a container database that is your information schema, your source of everything that's there, and then you have kind of your user databases underneath that allows you to plug in a database, and if you're doing migrations, that if you're going into a cloud environment, and the idea that we as DBAs are creating databases all the time, that kind of, to me, I would like to see that go away. I'm very much into DBaaS, database as a service, the idea that you set up these profiles and these service templates and you say, I have set up these kind of environment controls and I'm now going to set up my self-service portal and say people are going to have rights to come in here and have chargeback set up and everything else, and they're going to request a database. I am now a cloud database administrator. I'm up here in the cloud, and they're going to request this. And then they're going to get their database, and my job no longer is to do something as tedious as to create a database. I'm now going to be managing that cloud environment. It may be thousands of databases. But if you start looking at how this is going to be very feasible, even in an Exadata environment for consolidations and everything else, Pluggable Database fits in there too. So that you're actually going to have these container databases, and people are going to start consolidating these secondary smaller databases and be able to move them between one container database and another. I mean, that's pretty amazing, because when we were in the SQL Server world, we would actually detach a database and attach it to another SQL Server environment very fast, very quickly, and it was a real easy way to actually, I guess you'd say, migrate systems. It's much more complicated in previous years with Oracle, and this simplifies that ability to do that, especially in the cloud.
And
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Tim. The kind of phrased in the form of a question, if I remember the presentations correctly, the pluggable databases all share a single SGA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have this fragmentation problem of 300 databases that have 300 separate SGAs, some of which may all peak at the same time and drive basically the load out the roof of the system. So I think that's a really good, central management idea as well.
And if you talk to anybody, if anybody's taken the Encatech courses or any other course on Exadata management, one of the first things that you're doing when you're tuning an Exadata environment, what is it? You're making your SGA smaller. The whole idea of having a single SGA, people are going, how are we ever going to manage that with all these databases? Exadata is going, no, that's cool. Shrink it down, we're all right. A single SGA with a pluggable database environment makes total sense.
So for infrastructure management, really, building a server will now include installing once a container database, and that's it. Then you plug in databases that come and go on that server environment. So your image is going to be operating system, container database, and then you can start plugging things in. Is that correct?
Yes.
Very cool. The question is it different physical storage?
You could have a number of different physical storages. I mean, your standard environment is fine. You're seeing a lot of people are talking about it with Exadata, with just standard storage servers that you have. This is a default setting when you're actually installing 12c. They want, you got one pluggable database and the standard edition with your container database, that's what they want. Plus, Oracle, of course, has the nice licensing cost on it now, too. So, of course, they want you to use it. But it's really a nice feature. Like I said, for SQL Server, they've utilized it a very long time. And I remember migrating databases very quickly with it in that environment. And I see how functional it's going to be in the Oracle side.
Somebody tweeted, I think, that a pluggable database is really just now a cylindrical shaped USB stick, according to the slides.
At least in PowerPoint.
At least in PowerPoint.
So from a practical standpoint, container databases, PDBs, pluggable databases. So we've got the data dictionary that's split up. We have a different, from a DBA view. We've got different DBA views now for the container or for the pluggables. In other words, DBA data files, is that different? DBA table spaces, do we have a DBA PDB table spaces, or anybody? Bobby? How did those data dictionary views change between a CDB and a PDB?
You have a container ID column now, and then you have a bunch of CDB views. So like you have your all views, your DBA views.
Look into it? Oh, sorry. You have to start over. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know we were streaming here. Database views, you have additional, like we have our user views, our all views, and our DBA views. Now you're going to have a CDB view, which is going to have an additional column called con ID, which is going to identify your containerized database and then mappings down to the PDBs. So it's going to be an additional one. I think in my presentation I did a count on the number of views that there was. It was like 933 additional views.
Yay.
And then for the PDBs, I only found two. One of them, they tied together the PDBs and the CDBs. There's a view called CDB_PDB that does all the mapping for your pluggable databases.
Great.
But it's very light on the pluggable database side. Yeah, they didn't add much on that layer.
I don't know how to get over to you.
So if you're migrating hundreds of, 10G, 11G databases to 12C, do they all basically become separate core container databases by default, or do you have options to migrating them to separate pluggable databases sharing a core?
That's your choice, definitely.
Kenny?
Back to me.
Back to you.
I guess I can answer that question. When you go from an 11G to a 12C database, you have to upgrade path first. There's three basic upgrade paths. There's one from 10.203, 11.101, and 11.203, I believe is the version numbers. But you can gotta go to get the 12C. You gotta go directly to 12C in a traditional model, or what some of the beta testers coined as a non-CDB model. And then from there, you can make your CDBs and your PDBs migration.
This is the first time we've been discussing this stuff out in the open. This is great.
Since we're talking about all this, I guess, sorry, let me take a kind of a step up and just try to understand and get people to comment on what is the primary driver or some of the use cases for an IT shop considering to use pluggable databases versus separate databases, like in the instance that you were talking about over here.
Yeah, I think the big argument in favor of it.
Or cost savings.
Yeah. No, the big arguments in favor of it are reduced cost of administration, because you're basically looking after one central CDB now that contains all these PDBs. So the ability to consolidate and reduce labor to run the consolidated system is one argument. The other argument is just that it's a more efficient use of the hardware. So if you've got 200 separate databases, 200 separate SGAs, forget about the cost of manipulating parameters in each of 200 different systems now. But think in terms of how 200 SGAs have to now fight at the OS level for memory slots, right? You only have, I don't know how much memory, but it's a finite amount, and all your SGAs may not fit in there at once. So there's paging and swapping going on at the OS level, trying to figure all that out. Whereas most of those SGAs are probably not horribly active all the time if you combine them so that there's one database management system basically looking after all 200 PDBs in one CDB, in one central memory structure is a much more efficient use of the resources that you bought.
I'd say, just to add to that, a practical use case for that is consider the resource manager. How many folks
Exactly.
here use the database resource manager? Not many, but
Well, it's a developer conference. The 2 DBAs put their hands up.
yeah. Ouch. Well, just know that it's out there. When you have a server environment where you've got numerous 11G databases running on the same server, or the same cluster for that matter, Resource Manager feels pretty useless, to be perfectly honest, because you do have to, try to keep in mind that there's other databases, but they're not all working together this way.
I was just going to add real quick, for DBAs having to do quarterly security patches or software patches, does this mean basically they don't have to go to 100 separate databases to patch and they go to the core?
EM12C patch plans. Go towards it. I mean, go towards the light.
I mean, that's what our DBAs, first of all, we're always asking for new databases. Then every little upgrade, they go to 100, 500 databases for every upgrade, so.
But the answer is yes, right? I mean,
Yes. You need to patch these, but you can build these templates out and have your patch plans and start to feel comfortable with using the EM12C patch plans and let it do it automatically. You should not be wasting your resources and your time patching. It's a tedious, boring task. Yeah, let it start to automate it. My coworker out in Germany, some of you know him, Martin Bach. I laughed, he Skyped me like 2 or 3 weeks ago and said, oh my God, it patched my 12C beta database and I didn't even know it. I just came in one day and it's upgraded. It's pretty cool. It really, really is. And the 12C version seems to work even more effectively than the 11. But it's really getting there. So think about that. I mean, really do. I mean, it's a scary thought. I'm going to let it automatically patch. The best DBAs, we have our control issues, but there's a certain point where we need to start giving these up and say there's so many more effective ways that we can be utilizing our time.
I don't know, if I'm scared about my automatic Firefox updating. Strange to think about the Oracle database automatically updating, I gotta say. But for me as a PL SQL developer, PDB, CDB, I don't think I care, which was great because in my 6th edition of my book, that was a whole lot I didn't have to write about. I like that.
One more goal of the whole pluggable database thing is, I think 5, 10, 20 years from now, if any of us look, how many of us are actually going to have data centers? How many of us are going to actually be moving to the cloud? And the whole pluggable database, that's where it's moving towards.
I'm not going to remember how to wave bye-bye in 25 years.
Enterprise database with 100 pluggable databases underneath, is that a license per, or, I mean, is that?
The licensing, I think a lot of us have questions on it. I'm going to say you're going to need to talk to Oracle as they figure it out too, because at first we didn't think they were going to license on it. The standard edition was supposed to have one pluggable that was offered to you automatically, and then enterprise edition, they didn't say much of anything about licensing, and now they say you're going to require another license. It's still up in the air. If anybody knows different, please jump in, because we just know that you're going to be required for licensing on it. Larry needs another island. We don't know.
This one with dinosaurs. Yeah.
So if I can change the topic away from that for now, just a more general question. How are you guys interacting with the customers that you do, trying to influence developers to be more interested in overall performance and system performance and stuff? I find that I have no problem convincing DBAs to get interested in performance, and specifically in my case, SQL performance. But what are you guys doing, or how do you influence the developers to get more interested in performance of a system?
I do this talk called "Performance is a Bug." Let's figure out the specification. I think you should answer that question.
No, it's a battle. It's a battle. We're working on a project right now that has the word fast in the project name. Yet they didn't really think about performance until after they attempted to go live and it didn't go very well. I think you know who it is. And it's just a battle to get people to understand that performance is not just an attribute like this crazy, yeah, we probably won't need to worry about that. And yet, you know, just leave it to fate as to whether things are going to run quickly. And then I was in a discussion last week with a friend who was saying, hasn't hardware growth really gotten to where it's going fast enough now that we really don't have to spend all this extra labor making things, you know, perfectly optimal? And I made the same face you did. It was like, oh my God, seriously? Because you know what we did 2 weeks ago was try to figure out how to make a data warehouse refresh take less than an hour so they could do it 4 or 5 times an hour. And what we found out was that every refresh they were doing was an historical refresh from the very beginning of time, instead of an incremental since the one they did 10 minutes ago. And just the database can't figure that out for you. You know, you're the one in there writing the spec and the code to make things run. And if you do these things that just, you know, it's work that nobody really needs done, the database can't help. The database has to do what you ask it to do. I mean, it can cheat. It can say, oh, I've already parsed that SQL statement for this other guy. I'll give you the cursor handle to that. It can even do things like the result caching. Oh, I just answered that question. Here's the result without hitting the database. But it can't just not do stuff you ask it to do. And if you tell it, look, I want to do an historical data warehouse refresh back to the beginning of time, and 10 minutes from now I'm going to ask you for the same stuff except for 10 extra minutes too, the database can't help you. So it's really a battle. It's probably the most interesting question that I try to answer every day is how can we more effectively convince people that performance is important enough, and I think it's fun enough to think about farther upstream in the software development lifecycle. And I haven't hit on the answer except just to yell that the question's really, really, really important. And then try to explain to people by example and show them, look, you know, we'll show you just in this little piece of a project how it can go. And now look how smoothly that went 8 months later. Let's do more parts of your project the same way. And I mean, I'm trying everything I can think of.
I think we need to come up with an automatic upgrading system for developers. Yeah. But since that's not going to happen, so I've been talking about PL SQL and blah, blah, blah for many, many years. And for a long time, I was pushing hard on unit testing. Some of you may know. I've built 2 different unit testing frameworks and tools. I've pretty much given up at this point. Developers are not going to change their ways, especially PL SQL developers. We're pretty much who we are, I think, for the rest of our careers. Not, you know, with minor changes possible. So, did you want to?
I'm going to follow on after you.
Okay.
And I'm going to lob a softball for Kellyn.
I'm going to tweet Steve has given up on PL SQL development.
Go for it. No, unit testing. Getting developers to build and run unit tests. I haven't given up on developers. They're my best friends. But so my point is that I can do talks, I do quizzes, performance quizzes, blah. I touch maybe the tiniest percentage of the PL SQL community out there, and it's always going to be that way. We give our talks at our conferences and we do our webcasts. It's still a tiny, tiny percentage of anybody out there, and the people who come, they may or may not internalize what you say and change what they do. So my point is that we do need to automate the process. We should not look at developers as being any different from any other kind of human being. We are generally set in our ways. We do that. We take the easiest path possible to get our job done. So you have to sort of get into the path. So for example, I've been at Quest for a long time. Now I'm at Dell, and they try to do things inside Toad to make the tools smarter and to give more advice to developers. So right now you can use code analysis on a big complex program. It'll tell you all sorts of great stuff around performance. Like you've got a loop with a DML statement inside of it. You should be using for all. Now what I think we need to do is come up with stronger and stronger tools and then put it into the work stream. So right now, for example, I don't think code analysis can be integrated into the compile process. I would say we need nanny tools. I've been promoting Nanny-Toad for a while, but it's not going to happen, in which a manager should be able to check some boxes, and then you cannot compile your code into the database, or you cannot check in your code into your repository unless you've got unit tests built. I like that one for a while. But the code analysis is running. You have no performance issues flagged. Name it. The tools are getting probably almost smart enough to do a really good job of that. It just needs to be made a tool that at least management can say, why do you keep producing buggy, slow code? Here, I'll check this box. Then we'll find out, or maybe it won't happen anymore. That's, I think, our best shot at really changing it. And then maybe people will internalize that after a while. If you keep getting these flags in your code saying, why didn't you use for all here? At some point, it might become something that you just do.
The one comment I was going to make is to toss a huge softball for Kellyn to hit out of the park, but it has to do with sharing information, database administrators sharing information with everybody, especially developers. How do people who do performance tuning for a living, how do they find this information? Because they have sysdba access, and they do look at all the VDOL views and the AWR and the ASH and all that, and they do that day by day by day and get used to it. Got to spread the information, you know, so it's really all about, and I'll let Kellyn finish the sentence.
Going back into DBAS, Database as a Service, one of the things that I am strongly a believer of is that you have a pool of that service available to your testers, that they are allocated out that role and grants that they can request actual QA environments on a regular basis. They can do these tests, and if any time there's a failure, they can actually roll back to the previous version of the database like that and go forward again, and they can do this as many times as you want to grant them that ability to do. I mean, this is all set up. You can do this with the profiles and the service templates and give them that ability to test it out. The second option is, I have a lot of DBAs that tell me I am not giving my developers access to EM12C. No matter how many times I have put up on my blog how you can do this read-only access for their developers so they're looking at the performance views, nope, not doing it. Okay, fine. I understand that's where you're going, fine. I'm still against this because I believe that no DBA has the right to complain about any performance code, the performance of any code that goes in the production environment if they're not giving this access to their developers.
Great point.
At the same time, 12C has EM Express. Give your developers access to that. Bury Shaft, JB, Graham Wood spent a lot of time on the Ash Analytics that is in there. There is no overhead on your 12C database. It is out there. It gives your developers a beautiful view of all the environments, including production, so they know what they're up against once they go to production. And you will get beautiful code that is released to production, hopefully, if you've taught them what to do with it. And I have always been one, I feel that I do my best job when I am matched up with a fantastic developer. I don't have that mindset. I don't have the brain for that. But what I do have the brain for is to tell them what they need to do in that database to make it run faster.
So you like to be the boss. You like to be bossy.
Actually, it's funny, no. My job is to say, you are really good at this. I can tell you what's not working well in this database. You can fix it.
How
It's
many
just
of,
the way it is.
how many of you work at a company where developers do any kind of production support? That's good. Because one of the things that I see is that I blogged about this, where you've got this waterfall of architects that design a system and then they go off to do some other system, and then they hand off that to the developers, who now, with the architects gone, they're on different projects now. The developers now have to take a spec, which sometimes has ambiguities or maybe contradictions inside of it, and then they have to build software. So they're making decisions to change the spec occasionally because sometimes the specification is impossible to implement. And then the developers tend to roll off onto the next development project that the architects were architecting while they're on the red project. The architects are making the blue project. The developers roll off the red project onto the blue project, but now the red project's being handed to the database administration team, and any performance bugs are now solely the responsibility of the database administration team. And the developer that wrote it, he's working on another project now. He's billable 60 hours a week, so we can't talk to him anymore. So culturally, I see that being, like an almost impenetrable problem, because the architects they don't have a feedback loop that tells them to stop making mistakes. The developers don't have a feedback loop to tell them to stop making mistakes. So they keep sort of impregnating new projects through time with the same old mistakes that we were making 30, 40 years ago. And when I was at Oracle, going to 35 sites a year, the most successful sites that I saw were sites where one person would kind of stand over all these siloed areas, the network, the developers, the database administrators, the Unix sysadmins, the SAN administrators, and not be afraid to go, if wherever the problem might be, whatever gap between two groups of problem might be in, the person's not afraid to go penetrate that gap and figure out, how to bring people together to solve the problem. The problem that I see culturally in a lot of places is the silo idea. The assembly line of knowledge workers doesn't, in my mind, work. It needs some coherence or cohesion, I'm not sure which word to use, but of a person who's able to kind of oversee a whole project, who's got enough corporate credibility to be able to say, look, we we need to change the way we do projects so that we do performance testing earlier. I know it's expensive, but look how expensive it is to go down when we're in production trying to make money. You know, somebody can make that argument up the hill, and then make the argument down the hill that, look, you guys, your habits have to change. We have to do things that we are not accustomed to doing. We have to build software to try to facilitate how we do testing and how we push unit testing and performance testing earlier and earlier in the software development lifecycle.
Could you repeat that?
Did you turn off the mic?
Yeah, the mic seems to be off.
I can tell you what his question was. With instance parameters in a PDB, CDB environment, are the instance parameters local to the Ps or the global to the Cs?
Yeah, you have some instance-wide parameters, and I assume you still have those in 12C. So there are some very important parameters that are instance-wide that affect query behavior, for example. Now, how do you, in practice, how do you deal with that? Because I know from practice, from production systems, all of them, they have their different requirements, and this database needs that set, and the other one needs that one, which makes it very difficult to plug them in together into the same root database. How in practice do you deal with that? Do you have to go through and start classifying your different databases according to their, let's say, instance-wide parameter configuration?
They each have their own SP file, but even as of 11G, you should be pretty much using the default parameter settings.
Sounds very good in theory, but in practice things are very different. With specifically, you know, you're dealing with customers that have a lot of old applications, and you know, it's
Optimizer compatibility equals 8.2
Exactly.
kind of stuff.
I mean, simple one, and the most important one, cursor sharing, for example.
But you do, each one has their own SP file.
Each
Even for the
pluggable database has
Yes.
its own SP file.
That's
But the instance is common, right?
No, you have a container database and you have pluggable databases.
Tom.
Bobby? Yes. You can say the same thing.
Yeah, Tom's got it.
Yeah.
So there is but one physical SP file that belongs to the root, but each PDB
Yeah.
has a virtual SP file, which is a database table. There's a new column in $V parameter is pluggable, database settable, something like that, and many parameters that can be changed at the session level are settable at the PDB level. And so when you set your container to be a PDB1, it reads that little virtual SP file and makes those settings. So things like cursor sharing, OFE, bad ones like optimizer index, cost adjust, and such are settable down at the PDB level. But then there's a whole slew of them that are only settable at the instance level, like for archive logging and your fast recovery area and stuff like that. There's just one of those. So things that aren't settable at the session level typically won't be settable at the PDB level.
Is the event that triggers reading that file, is that
Take it back. The reading of the SP file would be done with a set container call. So I could be connected to a single root container. And if I'm a common user, I can do a set container call, and boom, I'll be in a PDB, and we'd have those settings done. Or more typically, you're logging in using a service to the PDB, and it will read that virtual SP file and make those settings.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hopping back to the performance questions before, kind of piggybacking on what Cary had said earlier about the cost of things. One of the ways I've gotten performance to be put back into a project on the developers is I sort of trick the project into it by saying, okay, give me $1 billion and I will spend as much time as you want, as long as you want, forever, working on making this system as fast as possible, trying to achieve 0 execution time. Not possible, but I'll get as close as possible as I can. And they say, well, I don't have $1 billion to give you. I'm like, well, give me $1 million. You know, they cut it down until eventually you get some chunk of money allocated to the project, and they say, okay, this is what we want to spend for performance. Like, okay, good. It does cost money to work at making your stuff faster, but then once it's in the project, it becomes something on the developer's plate to then consume, basically, because everybody writes bad code, but then the trick is, well, thinking, is there a better way? Do I have time? But a lot of times they go, well, this is the first version, I got it to work, now I'm done, I'll go to the next thing. Well, just because you got it to work doesn't mean it's good enough. But if you've got money in your project allocated, you can take that second pass and say, okay, it works, now it works better.
Great, thank you. You had a question.
Yeah, back to 12C. Can anyone speak, and forgive me, I'm a developer, so forgive me if I get the terminology wrong, but I thought I heard the term instance. Can you speak to if you have, say, 5 pluggable databases, or whether it be 20 or 50 or 100? I think there's some efficiencies gained in the number of databases you're running, but are you also increasing your risk exposure if that parent instant fails? Are we losing 5, 10, 20, 50 databases? Are we at risk of, or what could be some of the risk considerations there?
Good question.
A DBA is only as good as their last backup.
Well,
I guess speak to availability across all of those.
Yeah, single point of failure at the container level, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
that doesn't change. I know that, or at least I think I know, not knowing anything, that most of the availability features of 12C are at the container level. Tom?
So even in 11G, to protect against instance failure, we have that 3-letter acronym, RAC, right? That protects against instance failure, and we would say the same thing here. Yes, it's true that the loss of the one instance will take out all the plugged-in databases. But on the other hand, a DBA managing one instance is not going to have one of 20 instances continuously down, right? Because if you have 20 instances or 100 instances on a single server, at any point in time, one of them is going to be down for some reason or another. If we reduce the complexity of that down to one instance, so you do a PS and there's one PMOD, that's the perfect number for any given host. The DBA is going to be able to keep that up. You know, DBAs manage instances, not databases necessarily. So they're going to be managing that instance. All attention is going to be on it. It's not going to go down because some other instance took over all the resources on that machine, right? If you run more than one instance on a machine, the biggest problem I have with that is one of them is going to run away with everything. And even if you use CPU instance caging, if you have 30 instances on a machine and there's only 8 cores, you've overcommitted that machine. But if we have one instance and we can resource manage and give each one of those PDBs a share on that machine, you'll be able to resource manage across those and ensure that, hey, we never hit more than 80% utilization on that box, right? If you have more than one instance, you know, think about it, 30 instances times a minimum of 20 processes and maybe up to 40. So you're talking somewhere between 600 and 1,000 processes just to start up those databases. And all of a sudden we're down to 20, right? So from my perspective, this is going to increase availability. But if you're worried about instance failure, clustering, rack.
So, Tom, in your presentation, you'd mentioned how easy it was to unplug and plug. And given this scenario we're talking about, does the container have to be up for me to unplug? So I couldn't, in this, plug it into somewhere else easily? Or could I?
It's more complex than that. The instance would have to be up because if the instance has failed, that pluggable database needs crash recovery, right? And so that instance needs access to its redo to apply to that pluggable database to make it consistent so that you could plug it in someplace else.
Very cool. Okay, very cool. Oops. Am I here? Yes. Okay. I knew I had a comment somewhere in there, but I lost it while these guys were talking, so.
Can I ask a question? So for the developers out there who really don't care about pluggable databases, what would you consider to be, or do any of you have any serious pain points when you write code, like stuff that really gets in your way of succeeding? And tell us about them.
Well, I know one thing I always hate having to write over and over again is paging into queries. You know, I want the 30th through 40th rows of a result set. And it seems like there should be a more, there there's tons of different ways to write a query that does paging, but it seems like there should be something more baked in to do it than what there currently is.
Okay.
With the nested inline views and all. Yeah, row num.
She had her hand up.
There was a hand.
Right. No.
Towards us.
Oh, sorry.
Hotter, hotter, really, really hot.
So we're building an application in .NET and SQL, and using SQL Developer. And we are doing remote debugging between .NET and SQL Developer, and a lot of times we're running into the problem of seeing opaque. So we add a watch in SQL Developer, and we can't see anything, and we're compiled with debug, and it's really frustrating. So I don't know if anyone's run into that problem or knows anything about
Jeff
it.
Smith, Jeff Smith might have an idea. He's one of the top thinkers of our age.
23 top thinkers.
Sorry, Jeff.
You mean our time.
Space, time, it's a continuum.
I would answer with a question. So, anything you step into must be compiled with a debug. So if you've done that and it's not being shown, then I would ask, well, what type of variable or value are you trying to look at? What version of Oracle are you running?
A collection of what? Scalars or complex types?
I can demo it to you. I would open a ticket with my Oracle support, and that'll get tasked to me eventually. And then I'll talk to a developer who can, it could be the database. I don't have an answer, but it should work. Well, does it always work if you debug it directly versus remotely?
Okay, so her main pain point is SQL Developer. Anybody else? We got a hand back there. We got a hand. Is there a hand? I wasn't looking for individual features. I know, like a larger scale. You know, what are the things that stop you from being productive, stop you from writing higher quality code, encourage you to write more bugs in your code? Does anything come to mind? Or that was good. That caught something.
I can only speak for my company and my experience, but I feel like with the move away from a traditional waterfall model to more agile, we're kind of stuck in the middle. And there's some big projects that have, Scrum Master, and they're getting really good user stories. And then there's a lot of projects that were like, oh, especially support of old systems, and we're an EBS shop as well. Just, it's kind of like we're not doing waterfall or agile. And I mean, developers, literally the spec is like a conversation that you have, and then you might have a question and you ask it. We use a tool called Basecamp, and they might answer there, they might email you. Like it's really hard to kind of figure out what I'm even trying to develop. Great. So, I mean, forget performance. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. And I recently even had,
That's waterboarding.
I had one of the business analysts who I was coding what she told me to code, but after I coded it, she asked me to write what it did for her. So instead of her giving me a spec, it was kind of like, well, everything I told you, can you write it back to me? So I think it's just very challenging trying to transition into an agile shop. Maybe it's not really working for us, or we're not investing in it. And also, just in general, we're using developers as more of a commodity, plug and play type developers. There's no, I own this system, and so it's almost like if you're touching code that's been touched by 10 previous developers, you just want to go do that one little thing and get out, and you don't think about it holistically.
That's what go-tos are for. Seriously, that's what they're for.
We've had a similar problem in my company to what you were describing, and the only way we figured out to kind of resolve that is to require that the teams making the requests provided user acceptance criteria up front. They had to say, if it does these things, it is passed, and that's QA complete, basically. So from that, you can kind of check your own stuff and say, did I fulfill all these requirements? If so, then I'm done, basically.
And I want to add a comment to that. Instead of writing that in Word, write it in something that you can execute
Yeah,
so
right.
that then 3 months from now you can pull a crank and say, does it still meet the user acceptance criteria?
Regression testing.
Exactly, exactly.
There's a hand behind you, way behind you. But you can't ask about pluggable databases.
I wasn't going to ask about pluggable database, but the gal in the purple, I don't think 12C addresses your issue either. And just to comment, I don't have a feature or something that inhibits me, but Stephen, just to kind of play off of what you're asking, it's kind of funny, all the years that I've been developing, I'm not sure, does Oracle actually have something where the user group can get involved in terms of enhancements and giving our feedback in, or requests on enhancements, tracking that in the upcoming releases? Do we have any kind of voice in there?
You mean for PL SQL developers?
Yeah, or database, or whatever it may be.
That's a great question. My sense regarding PL SQL, I can't really speak to other stuff, is that there's not a whole lot of opportunity for us to have much influence on PL SQL and its direction. I think it's largely driven by Oracle application requirements these days. And that's good because they're pretty extreme requirements. So, usually we can benefit from whatever they get. But yeah, I think it's actually a pretty big problem. I think they live in in their world, doing stuff, largely serving users who are not the people who are writing PL SQL code. And I'm hoping that over time we can see more attention paid to improving the language from the standpoint of development productivity, robustness of the code we write, things like that. But I don't know, maybe somebody knows about some sort of channel, but I have a channel. Well, we all have a channel. You can all email Bryn Llewellyn. Seriously, bryn.llewellyn@oracle.com, and you can say, I've got a problem with PL SQL. I needed to do this, and here's why, and provide the business case.
Yep.
And that, if you provide a business case as opposed to me, I just whine about stuff like, Bryn, I want the error message in the save exceptions, bulk exceptions pseudo collection. And he just says, yeah, but you're Steven, Anyway, email, business case, and that at least he must have some rule about what he has to do when he gets those. And then maybe it'll percolate up if they get enough interest in similar areas.
I recall a website, enhance.oracle.com. Is that gone?
No.
Is it still around?
Well, you can also submit enhancement requests through Oracle. That's
Through
what I do
LOS?
for anything, yeah. No.
Yeah, there never has
Don't
been.
think you'll get a response. You can just put in a request.
I will say your user group itself also has monthly calls with IOUC. And if there's a general basis of a problem and it's brought up through the user group and we can have a commonality, we can push that through. And we can work with Oracle product managers to do something.
I'm told it's also very helpful to find out who is involved at Moss and different places in social media and to pester them. I found out that it works very well for me. If I whine really loud on Twitter, all of a sudden I have product managers going, will you please warn me before you start to whine out on social media? I've got 3 different people, Chris Warticki and other people saying, you're supposed to help this person. So it does help to stalk people out on social media.
Well, we could start a petition. We can start petitions, change.org, right? I want the error message in my bulk exceptions failure. 20,000 people sign it.
I know that SQL Developer has a forum where you can put in enhancement requests, and those that get many likes are maybe being made now and again. Like Jeff Smith said, 2 of the last top 10, they are in the next release of SQL Developer. Could Oracle produce similar forums for different things, not just SQL Developer?
It works very well for Enterprise Manager 12c, yeah. We've had very good response for them when we state, we have an enhancement request. Sorry, Jobs has not gotten that kind of response, the EM Jobs, but the rest of it, the fixes have gone in very effectively.
So I think what it comes down to, sorry, just real quickly, is that it depends very much on the team within Oracle as to what happens and what kind of visibility they have and how accessible and responsive they are. The Apex team's amazing. I have a problem with my upgrade when I do an import and I send an email to Joel, and this was on a weekend a few months ago, and they actually patched Apex for later that day so I could do my import. And I don't think it's because it's me. They're extremely responsive. The PL SQL team is not like that. It's a different, each organization is different. It has its own history and its own way of dealing with its user base. I like the Apex approach.
So I want to go back to your earlier comment, Stephen, about code quality and PL SQL. One of my experiences in working in an Agile environment that's doing continuous integration as a database person is I'm learning new technologies and tools. And so a build environment for continuous integration might use Jenkins or Hudson to continuously compile code that's checked in. And so one of the things that I've seen as well is they'll use something called PMD and check style to do code quality analysis on the code they've checked in. And that's a Sonar plugin that plugs into Jenkins. And one of the things I found is there's a PL SQL code quality analysis that you can use that'll use the Toad Code Expert library, right, to check the quality of the code as you've checked it in. So it's not only that I want developers to learn this, but as a DBA person or database person, I have to learn what tools they're using and kind of speak their lingo a bit. But there does appear to be a movement to start doing some of that code quality stuff in an Agile continuous integration way. So it's kind of neat.
Could you say those names again?
Sure. So that starting with the continuous integration, you're talking Hudson and Jenkins. Hudson and Jenkins can call Sonar, which is a code quality tool, and they usually call something called PMD or check style, which is a code quality analysis tool. Check style PMD have a PL SQL library that you can call that will quality control your PL SQL.
But just to be clear, so the Sonar piece that ties into the Toad code analysis engine, you have to have a license to Toad as part of that.
Any other thoughts?
I got a thought. This is a question I asked Dominic and Chad at lunch. What would you like to see in this track at this conference us to talk about? What kinds of things? I had a presentation yesterday where fairly large room, fairly good attendance, but kind of I wish it were more. What would be more interesting for us to talk about? I mean, I don't feel like an alien. I don't feel like I'm an outsider in a developer conference because I mean, most of my life I've done more development than DBA type stuff. But I do feel maybe a little bit of a disconnect in terms of what audiences here want more of from kind of the database perspective. So any comments about that?
And I have one from the panel side, is that I will be working on the database track for next year, and I do want more DBA stuff. So I'm pushing for that.
I notice we do have some sessions on data modeling, but there's not a lot of discussion on data modeling and just basics of good database design. It seems to be kind of a lost art. Whereas back when forms sat right on top of the database, everybody kind of had to know good database design concepts. Now, a lot of developers are database design's a black box.
It's intuitive. We just do it naturally.
Yeah.
I do.
It seems a lot of developers. A lot of developers now, it seems to be a little bit of chasm. Some developers think it's a DBA job. Some DBAs think it's a developer job. But where's this person in the middle who does that? And it's really key.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that this conference has labs, and I've attended a couple of them. But when in attending the labs, they're kind of, I don't have to be here to do the lab. Those labs I've attended, they give you this material, just read it, walk through, do it yourself, step by step. There's not a lot of interaction. And maybe labs could be more interactive, where hey, let's take a look at a problem and let's work it together in the room. Mm-hmm. Less of me reading and more of us collaborating or doing.
I'll give a partial response on that, and then doing that kind of stuff.
Don't take it personally.
Yeah. Doing that kind of set piece slide is problematic.
Let me check. I'm sorry, just first one quick follow-up on that question. So if I did a session, let's say, in which I invited everyone to bring their laptops, and I put up a set of requirements on the screen and said, write some code. Now, obviously, scale to something hopefully reasonable. How many of you would be interested in attending something like that? Okay, thanks.
So to
general question. I was a content chair for the traditional side this year, and that's one of the things that we talked about
Put it against your
frequently,
mouth.
hands-on training. There we go. And I know I pushed Jeff and his group to provide more interactive type affairs, but you know, as Tim said, they are incredibly difficult to get set up and do. It's you know, there are a lot of online resources for that where you can do it at home and still get a fair amount of learning from it. But that's something that we're definitely pushing to do.
One more.
All right. I think for me, I love hearing about the 12C features, but for our organization, those are 4 or 5 years down the road. So for us, it's more like taking a case study of a problem at a real organization and showing how it was solved. Like maybe like .NET and what you did to resolve those kind of problems, or connectivity pooling, or something like that, where we can actually see organization A solved the problem in 10G or 11G using certain methods.
That's nice.
So that's probably what I'm looking for.
Just one other comment. So you said, you know, 12C is way down the line for you guys, so why even bother learning about it? And that's a really good point. One thing I would suggest that you all do is anytime a new version comes out is check the list of new features, you know, spend a little time studying them, and then ask yourself, should I be changing the way I write my code today to prepare for those features? Because, for example, with 11G, the function result cache is a fantastic, powerful feature, but you don't exclusively use it with functions, but it's mainly designed to be used with functions around SQL statements. Most developers don't do that. They expose and duplicate their SQL all over the map. So if I were a 10G developer looking at moving to 11G, I would start preparing my code by creating more functions that will then be result cacheable and usable. So even if it's a long way off, the flip side of it, you know you're going to be there at some point. So what do we change now to be in a really good shape to take advantage of it? Maybe that would be a good session too. I used to do a talk on who cares about 11G or something like that, or here's why you should care about 11G now.
You're going to do a who cares on 12.